Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 4 announcements for History 370. So, I need to talk a little bit, first of all, about the old writing assignments. I was very relatively happy with the old writing assignment, the one for Week 3. I was a little sad that people didn't notice that Admiral Togo, in one of the postcards dedicated to him, had a heart frame surrounding him. And I just thought that was the funniest thing, that they actually made a postcard with a heart around Admiral Togo, because we all love Admiral Togo, don't we? And I do believe I mentioned this in the lecture, but I got to visit his shrine in Tokyo. He's now a Shinto deity, a nation protecting deity, literally a god of war in a sense. And I love the fact that they had a heart around him. Now, to talk a little bit about the new writing assignments, both of the new writing assignments, I have to say, are a little difficult. Some of these, I think, especially week 2 was relatively easy. Week 4, those a little hard. The first one is called The Madman's Diary, and that is a story by Lu Xun. There's a documentary about Lu Xun. I talk about him in the lecture. It's good to read something that the guy actually wrote. Now, his writing can be very difficult because it's very subtle. And one thing I have to emphasize, this is a madman's diary, right? It's supposed to be something written by a crazy guy. So some of it's crazy. And the point is, you're supposed to get that. You're supposed to, as you read this, keep this in mind. This person is not well. And I love it right at the start. It has one of my favorite lines where it basically says, this dog was looking at me funny, right? And he's very disturbed by the fact that this dog is looking at him funny. And I love that. Now, The Madman's Diary, I think, is disturbing in kind of an entertaining way. The other reading, Comfort Women, is disturbing in a way that is not entertaining. It's very disturbing. I talk about the Comfort Women a lot. I talk about it in the lectures. I won't talk about it here. I just want you to be ready. That's disturbing. Try and read these things when you're in a good and fresh mood, and just be ready for things that are not so fun. But it is something I think it's important for us to understand. Now, as you may recall, because of my error with the video, and again, I'm sorry about that, I delayed the midterm, so it's due 11:59 p.m. Monday, right? So I can't say anything much about the midterm grades in this announcement because I haven't been able to see them all because not everyone has taken them because it's not due yet. But I will be checking the grades tomorrow morning, and I will send out an email with any information I want to share about those grades. I do want to say something now, though, is that I posted your pre-midterm grade. I will also include a post-midterm grade. And one thing you have to think about is the grade you need or you want, right? You should certainly want nothing less than a B. And the thing you have to say to yourself is, okay, I want a B, but my post-midterm grade is a C. What do I need to do to change? Right? Now, if you got a B or an A and that's what you want, you just keep doing what you're doing. But if you got a C, you got to do something to change, right? If you're like, I want a B, but I got a C, or even worse, I got a D, I got to change how I'm doing these things. And I'm happy to talk with you about how to do that, right? I'm happy to talk with you how to do that. Though remember that the first thing I'll say is, please send me your study guides. And if you're not filling out your study guides, that's probably where you need to start. That's where you need to start in terms of doing better. But in any case, if you just want to think about how to change things. Now, if you're like, I can't change anything, I'm taking 3 classes, I'm working 40 hours a week, then you need to talk to your advisor and the registrar about possibly dropping the class, bluntly speaking. One thing to share one experience I had with you, I've had a student who was an advisee, and he took one of my summer classes several years ago, and he failed the class. And I had wanted him in the class because he needed to raise his grades, and he just didn't do the work. And I was like, what happened? He's like, well, I had to work. And I'm like, well, I don't think you're working 16 hours a day. I mean, I don't understand why you wouldn't do the work for the class, but you should have just made a decision. You should have dropped the class. Even if you can't get a full refund, at least you wouldn't have gotten the F. In any case, I'm happy to talk with you about how to improve your grade. There's no shortcuts, of course. You would need to do the work, and if you don't have the time to do that, you want to think about dropping, and I'm happy to talk with you about that. Now, on a cheerier subject, or maybe I shouldn't say cheerier, you can decide which is more cheerful, I need to talk about the upcoming videos. So you'll notice that almost all of this week is just Section 8. Section 8 is a huge section, and I did that on purpose. So one thing that we tend to do when we look at the history of Asia is we tend to divide up things into nice little chunks of time. So we'll talk about, the Nanjing decade from 1927, 1937, when you had the Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists governing China there. We'll talk about the rise of militarism in Japan. We'll talk about the Chinese Civil War. We'll talk about Japan's invasion of China. We'll talk about World War II. And we often divide up those things into different sections. But the fact is that for many people, these things were going on at the same time and impacting each other. So it's very important for us to kind of consider them together to understand how the breakdown of China and the central Chinese government in the 1910s helped lead to Japan's invasion of China later on. We often treat those as two totally separate things. The 1911 revolution of China and the Japanese invasion of China in 1937, or the Manchurian incident in 1931, we often treat those as discrete events, but they're really closely interconnected. And that's why I've got this mammoth Section 8, because I really want to try, and that's, I think, what's important about this class, is we're trying to consider that China, Japan, Korea together. What did that all mean to have them all together, right, impacting each other? Also, it points to a disturbing pattern in a sense, in that basically what has happened is, you'll notice sections 1 through 3 were building up to section 4, which is all about war. Sections 5 through 7, right, we're all building up to section 8, which is all about war. So that would seem, if we believe in this kind of patterns in history, that we're building up for another war in East Asia. I hope that doesn't happen, but I do want to point that out, right? It's funny that that's how the class fell out, but that's just something to kind of think about. Now, there is another documentary that you'll watch here called Writers and Revolutionaries. I think that this is a really good documentary. It's a little old, but it talks about these two authors, Lu Xun and Kita Iki, who first is Chinese, the second is Japanese, who are very important. And a historian who taught me Japanese history, Professor George Wilson, he is interviewed in this video. And that makes me really happy. And I actually remember I was I think I was still an undergraduate, and I was in Evansville, Indiana with my father watching PBS together, because that's the kind of thing you do with your kids if you want them to be historians. And we were watching this video, and all of a sudden my professor popped up, and I was like, oh my gosh, my professor's on TV. That's awesome. I was very happy. So, but I think that's a good documentary, and I wanted to highlight that fact. Now, this is something that is going to be really complex, so please bear with me for a second. But there is a movie trailer I'm asking you to watch, which stars someone named Shirley Yamaguchi in a movie called The House of Bamboo. Shirley Yamaguchi is the name a Japanese actress used when she performed for Americans, but she also used other names like Riko Ran, and she also went by, I believe, Yamaguchi Yoshiko. She went by a bunch of different names. And she's almost like a chameleon in that she would change her kind of her ethnicity, in a sense, and deploy that with different people to achieve a particular result, right? And it's amazing, basically, that the character she would play Chinese characters, even though she was Japanese, in Japanese movies, who were these kind of subservient women who symbolized how China should submit to Japan. And then she turns around and plays the exact same thing, but she's a Japanese woman who's acting submissive to Americans. Right, so it's kind of important for understanding how Chinese, Japanese, Koreans relate to each other, and how the United States come into the role, to watch this movie trailer. And I talk a lot about Shirley Yamaguchi in there. So I wanted to mention, first of all, why I include the movie trailer. I do want to point out, though, also, unfortunately, this does include, the trailer includes kind of an episode of what you could call domestic violence. Basically, the main male American character slaps Shirley Yamaguchi. I certainly think that's wrong. I just want to highlight that if that's something that bothers people. I kind of explained to you what it's about, what the purpose is there. I still want you to watch it, but that's not, if that triggers you, don't watch it. That's why I explained it. But I think it's important still to watch it if you can, because it really highlights, again, this kind of patriarchy at the time, and just the kind of the atmosphere of this time period. And I do also should point out that this is technically a film noir movie, and the heroes are usually flawed, and that's why I think they include that scene. Still an uncomfortable scene, but still, I think, worth watching if you're able. Gives you a real sense of the time. Another thing, and again, this is one reason these announcements are important, because it gives me the opportunity to kind of mention things about these videos. There is a video called Chinese Revolution Civil War by Feature History, which is excellent. Great series. Highly recommend watching it. I use them in my classes because I think they're great. But it begins with the creator saying, "I will not make a racist joke about Chinese," and then he kind of has this racist Chinese caricature on it, and it's really weird. But the Chinese character is actually to a graphic novel written by Gene Yang, a Chinese American author, and it's used to critique anti-Chinese racism. So he's not trying to be racist towards Chinese people. He's making reference to a work that is against racism against Chinese people, right? So this, and unfortunately, I would just edit it out so I wouldn't have to give such an explanation, but I can't do that because it's on YouTube. But I just want to mention this. This isn't meant to be anti-Chinese. It's anti-Chinese, or it's anti-racism towards Chinese people. Okay, so there we go. This week's quiz is a little bit easier. It is due by Sunday, 11:59 p.m., right? So Sunday, 11:59 p.m., be sure to take the upcoming quiz. That will be 30 questions, each worth 3 points, just basically on the week 4 information. Your password for this week is George, after the two Georges who taught me Japanese history, George Ellison and George Wilson, right? George Ellison, to my knowledge, has never been in a documentary. Otherwise, I would include it. But George Wilson has. But in any case, in honor of the two Georges, the password is George. Don't forget to send that to me by Tuesday, 11:59 p.m. Don't forget to take the quiz by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. and the writing assignment and anything else that's due. All right. Have a good week and email me if you have any questions.